All right. Well, I'm here with Caitlin and Liz, and the bird is free, which is the first thing. Of course, Elon Musk did finally acquire Twitter, commemorating this event by carrying a sink in so he could tweet, let this sink in, which is, the level of humor one can expect from him. And everybody on my timeline is freaking out, jumping ship, planning to go somewhere else. And I don't know. I think it's a little too early to panic. Everything you do is owned by some billionaire who is probably a lunatic, but what the hell? Anyway, so he fired a bunch of top executives, which is pretty much what he said he was going to do. He refused to be on the board. He hated the top executives, and he said he's going to fire 3/4 of the staff. Although later he said maybe not. But anyway, he's going to shake everything up. Now it's a private company, no longer on the stock exchange, and he's going to shake it all up and make money, have subscription services, and make a top quality ad platform, he claims, to get more advertising money. And I imagine that's all true. And of course, he'll probably let Trump on very soon, followed by all the right wingers coming back. And I'm not as upset about that as everybody else. I sort of feel like we need to talk to people. And that was his goal. He said, if everybody, we should have a free speech platform where everybody can talk, and instead of dividing into our isolated camps where we just hear reinforcement of our own beliefs and split. And he's not entirely wrong about that. I'm just not sure it's possible. For that remark, in that spirit, I'm very surprised that everybody is dumping Kanye West so fast, because it seems to me like open violence against Jews and anti-Semitism is now a mainstream Republican position. Donald Trump is the same. I'm glad if America is not willing to be openly Nazi and anti-Semitic, but that's news to me. As far as I can tell, most Republicans are quite happy with it. I'm
really confused by both the anti-Semitic yet historically pro-Israel stance of the right.
Well, yes. Yeah.
So you're confused because this involves a lot of religion. And so none of it by default makes any sense. And I'm not saying that. Yeah. I'm not saying that, to riff on religions. But you have to understand the context, of where this pro-Israel stance comes from. It's not a stance of we support, the Jewish people and the people of the Middle East. It's coming from a place of prophecy. That they believe that the Bible talks about Israel and Israel being sort of reborn in the end times and stuff. And so Israel being here is a way for Jesus to return and show all the Jewish people that they were wrong and they're going to end up in hell. So.
Yes. I remember when I was a young kid going to Protestant church, we had, I think, the Nicene Creed, and it said it is your duty to help bring about the return of Christ, which will destroy the world. And I came home and asked my parents, I'm supposed to want to destroy the world? And they said, shut up, kid. But that is actually the American Protestantism with this Revelations and end time stuff, which, as far as I can tell, is entirely an American science fiction invention. But it's at the heart of many Protestant churches. And certainly the evangelicals that are on the right.
I got kicked out of Sunday school as a kid asking these kinds of questions about plot holes. And, some of us never learn.
Yep. Now, I went so far as to actually read some of the serious Bible research, which explains how it ended up this way, how it really is an amalgamation of 4 contradictory religions shoved in the same document, which is why you find all that weird stuff in there. Anyway.
So it's basically just merge conflicts.
It is. But I mean, if you're going to be a fundamentalist and claim that every single word in there is 100% true and not contradictory, then you have a lot of cognitive dissonance problems.
Yeah.
But if you're regarded as mythology like all the rest, like the tales of Zeus and everything, then it's not that hard to handle. Anyway, so let's go on to Liz, who has something called Dragon Bridge. It's a good name.
It's pretty interesting. It is a cool name. It is the name that has been given to a group of Chinese cyber criminals by Mandiant's Threat Research Group. Well, I'm not sure if they're the ones who bestowed the name, but they're the ones who really broke the story loose. And it's pretty interesting. They had found sort of definitive evidence of this APT, Chinese APT group, really aggressively targeting US citizens and trying to sow division between political, between the political sides in the US, as if we needed any more. I think we're we've got plenty, but they added fuel to the fire and are really doing their best to discredit elections security and discourage folks from voting in the 2020 in the next round of elections. So,
well, I think that's new. And the Russians have always wanted to just cause division and collapse the American system, but I think it's new for the Chinese to do that.
Yeah, it was interesting because one of the out from this report that Mandiant published, which is a very thorough, interesting report, kind of an interesting read. They mentioned that this campaign also pointed to frequent mentions of civil war on social media and incidents of politically motivated violence, including confrontations between individuals supporting opposing parties and acts against the FBI as evidence of deterioration of the political process and its impending demise. So,
it's too bad because relations between the US and China are deteriorating so badly. We're getting so hostile with each other. I'm really unhappy to see it.
It is. I hate to see it too. And some of it's just bizarre. Like one of the points in this campaign has been that they've been trying to plant the seed that the Nord gas pipeline that blew up, that was really a group backed by the US government.
Well, I'd like to find out what happened there. It's very strange. It seems like Russia did it, but it seems like it hardly promotes Russia's interests.
Right.
So do people blame the Ukrainian or the Americans who might possibly have some benefit from it? But I highly doubt that too.
Well, and the Chinese have been blamed for it as well. So, I mean, it's just as this sort of information warfare is really become more of the landscape has changed a lot in the last 10 years as far as that goes. And I mean, this foreign interference in elections is becoming a more and more prevalent thing just through more subtle means like social media campaigns and stuff like this.
Yeah, but it's too bad to see the nations are really spoiling for a war. I saw one article I thought was kind of cheerful. They said, China might take this opportunity to attack Russia while Putin is distracted. And I said, boy, that would be great. But anyway.
Well, the bright side to this article is that the Mandiant researchers found that this campaign has not been very successful so far because they haven't had very much luck getting real people to engage with it, and the execution has been pretty poor. So
yeah, I think that's another wishful thinking. It would be nice if the battle of Americans against other Americans was all the fault of a foreign influencer, but I'm afraid the foreign influencers are really not significant. And we really do hate each other that much all by ourselves.
That, and I think the other thing is, I don't really think you need to discourage people from voting because there are already enough people that believe that it doesn't matter, your vote doesn't matter, that the system's all rigged, that it's all BS, and so they're not going to vote anyway. I know a lot of people like that.
Yeah, our system is not covering itself with glory, and for that matter, neither is the UK. I don't think you really need to lie if you wanted to say, that democracy over there is not working very well. You should just have our system instead. You wouldn't need to stretch the truth much to make that argument right now.
Right.
Anyway. And Caitlin's got gambling.
Yeah, well, as always, I always like to talk about the moral depravities of the United States. So Apple Insider has an article talking about gambling store ads next to addiction recovery apps. So what's going on? So Apple decided in all their wonderful decision-making skills to add ads to their app store, which seems like a really bad idea, but they did it anyways. And of course, what ended up happening is that a bunch of the ads are for gambling apps to go and spend your money on gambling, because believe it or not, gambling is a huge business in the United States, and there's a lot of money put into advertisements for said applications. So what's ending up happening is that if you search for gambling addiction, helping ads, like you're trying to get out of a gambling addiction, Apple will now show you ads for more gambling. So this has not turned out well at all.
This is typical AI ad placement.
Yes. So what happens is that when you put up an ad, you can like search for certain keywords, similar categories. So if you're putting up a gambling stuff, you would look for keywords like gambling, poker, depression, drinking, it's stuff associated with gambling, and people looking for help will undoubtedly also see ads for more gambling stuff. Which, by the way, why are we allowing gambling on phones?
Well, actually, that's right. I thought gambling was illegal except for a few places like Las Vegas.
Yeah, no.
I
know
couldn't have an app that was explicitly gambling. I thought it always had to be for tokens or something. So
yeah, well, apparently, you can do gambling with tokens, but make it real enough with real money tokens and trade with other people. I mean, and the thing about gambling, it's not really about the money. It's about addiction.
Yeah, it's interesting. My first teaching job was working with high schoolers. I mean, this is within the last 10 years. And it was fascinating to me that, we'd have a lot of random discussions in the classroom. And what came up over and over again was that the worst problem that these kids, social issue that these kids were dealing with in their inner city high schools, it wasn't the stuff that you'd normally think about. It wasn't sex or drugs or rock and roll or any of that. It was gambling. They have these high school gambling rings where they do like sports betting and stuff. And the kids said that's a major problem. Like they actually get into debt, and they're little high school bookies running these numbers and stuff. I mean, I was really, really surprised to hear that.
yeah, I thought it was all guns and shooting each other, but what do I know?
Oh no, it gets better, Sam, after the guns.
Okay. I remember I taught at a school in West Oakland, and one of the other teachers said, I have a box in the front of the classroom and everybody has to put their gun in there when they file in. And I didn't have that box. And as far as I know, none of my students had guns, but
my first thought was, from a harm reduction standpoint, like the gambling's got to be better than the drugs or the guns, but I guess it's pretty deleterious as well.
Yeah, maybe not better than the drugs.
Maybe not.
All right.
They really probably don't need an app on their smartphone to make it even easier.
I guess not. There's sure a lot of ads I hear about propositions. Some proposition having to do with gambling. Anyway, so there's something I've heard of before, I never paid much attention, called the HARP Array, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. But now it got my attention. They are sending out radio signals and they're having fun bouncing them off things. They bounce them off the moon, which has been done for a long time. Now they're bouncing them off the ionosphere. Now they're sending signals up into the ionosphere that are intense enough to cause like artificial auroras, to measure like the atmosphere. And now they're bouncing it off Jupiter. That's the latest one. They're going to make a radio signal from the US, from Earth, that is so strong they can bounce it off Jupiter like radar and measure the response. And so they have a whole series of interesting research in the atmosphere of Earth and the atmosphere of other planets they can do this way, which sounds great. And of course, the conspiracy theorists say they're controlling the weather and causing cancer and everything. But I didn't realize this was getting so powerful. It sounds like a lot of very interesting science.
Yeah, I mean, Earth, Moon, Earth, communications is really hard alone. And the moon is a big target.
Yeah.
And it's close by. I cannot imagine the power and precision necessary to bounce a radar beam, a radio beam off of Jupiter. And not only that, Jupiter is a huge transmitter as well. It is not just like a dumb rock like the moon. It is actively, transmitting.
Yeah.
So you'd have to, find a frequency that I guess Jupiter's not transmitting at, and then bounce radio waves off its ionosphere. I mean,
I know. I mean, I would have immediately rejected this as obviously impossible, but apparently not.
I mean, obviously, it's obviously not impossible. If we can do it off the moon, we can do it off Jupiter. But seems very difficult.
For the reasons you state, I would have said you'd probably never be able to detect the signal or measure it with any precision enough to get any value out of it. But they think they can do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
This may be a new form of ham radio communication in the future, where if you want to reach anyone, on Earth, pretty much, you can just bounce it off one of the planets.
Well, I don't think it's going to be an amateur entertainment, but I'm amazed anybody can do it at all. Anyway, however, in speaking of impossible things, Liz can read your mind.
Well, not just yet, but progress is being made on the mind reading machine. These researchers figured out that they could use functional MRIs to determine when certain parts of the brain are stimulated. And some researchers at UT Austin figured out that they could start developing and training an AI model that can work out specific word sequences that correlate to the brain activity that's shown in these fMRI images. And it's pretty interesting. They got it to the point where participants in the study could listen to a story, and then this model that they've been training could decode a sequence of words in the person had heard and processed in their brain based on these fMRI images.
Yeah, and the surprising thing here, because I used to do this kind of work many years ago, is that you would expect you could find out what people are thinking if you can measure the activity of individual neurons. But fMRI just monitors the blood flow, which is like a low resolution map of what part of the brain has more activity, low resolution both spatially and in time. And most people say that kind of vague measurement wouldn't really give you much in the way of information. But apparently you can pretty much get a clue of what topic they're following in a story. So it seems to me like you could do something like make a lie detector that worked that way.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting too, in that, just like you said, it's fairly non-specific data that you gather from the fMRI. So it's pretty interesting. I mean, I think that, just like with most machine learning, the more you train it, the more accurate it's going to be. So you'd have to spend a lot of time having this thing look at your brain to get to a point where it could make some educated guesses about what you're thinking. But it is pretty interesting to see this research going in this direction, and you definitely think about that, like, how is this going to be used by the cops down the road?
Yeah, although right now you have to sit in an MRI for 12 hours, but since it is just measuring from the outside of the skull, the blood flow, it seems like you could have one of those helmets that they have in the science fiction movies that would do this, that kind
Maybe
of thing.
Someday.
Yeah, probably not too far in the future. Anyway, all right. And Caitlin's got Tesla.
Yeah. So finally, there's a story on Reuters about about Reuters. Thank you.
Routers are different. It threw me on the
Yes.
wrong track. Anyway,
Reuters. Yes.
Yeah.
I swear to God, I was a news editor at one point, and I still can't. I can sometimes not pronounce Reuters. Anyway, so there's an article on Reuters talking about Tesla facing a U.S. criminal probe because they claimed that their cars were self-driving. But of course, we all know by now that they may have exaggerated a little bit. The story is by Mike Spector and Dan Levine. And yeah, so basically when you get a Tesla, the people at Tesla initially said, this is a self-driving car. You're only in the driver's seat for legal purposes. The car is going to do everything for you. Now, of course, this is not the case. They then switched to, well, you must be in the driver's seat. This is really important to, well, it'll kind of stop you from getting into a few crashes once in a while. And so because of those claims, there are several probes that are being targeted towards Tesla. So these are criminal autopilot investigations, and so the U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration opened their own administration, to like a series of crashes stemming from like autopilots, crashing into parked emergency vehicles, and yeah, so there's a bunch of these probes going into Tesla, and so they're finally going to sort of face the music, I would hope, and maybe in the future not get people's hopes up on these false advertisements, because this was a big issue. That, I mean, even I was like, oh, wow, if this works and I have no reason to believe it won't work, this would change driving forever, make things safer, take the human element out of the equation. Drunk people would be able to drive home because they wouldn't be driving. I mean, this would be fantastic. We wouldn't have to deal with drunk drivers. But of course, it was all, I wouldn't say completely hot air. I have heard stories of people in their Teslas being saved when the Tesla automatically braked because it was going to hit something they didn't spot in time. But as far as being like fully self-autonomous, no, that's just not the case.
And they do describe it that way, which would seem like an obvious FTC violation.
It's an FTC violation. It is. And they absolutely should be investigated and have these criminal probes launched against them.
Yep. All right. So a serious film producer called Niels Jewell, who works with Martin Scorsese, has an article that he's done is he's made a DAO to fund movies. And what he says is that the current, because movies are now using AI to help try to make business plans, the problem with that is all it does is repeat old stuff. This is why you have things like the Marvel comic universe, where the only thing that can possibly get approved by any of the big studios now is to repeat a theme that's already been done before. And all the people with a new original movie can't get any funding. And that's what he claims he's going to solve with NFTs. They're making an NFT movie funding agency. And he said, this is the best way to raise money to promote new movies on the blockchain with a DAO and the NFTs. So we'll see. But of course, I always thought this is kind of what NFTs are good for, and it's kind of what the blockchain is good for, is financial investment things. So it might work. They did admit their first attempt to do this did not work, but it's an interesting idea that you can have small business escaping the rapacious capitalist machine of the big companies with the DAO. That's kind of the promise of this thing from the from the early days of the blockchain, and we'll see. It may be yet that there'll be a blockchain project that actually accomplishes something, but there are some naysayers out there.
Like I may be, yeah, I may be one of those naysayers.
I get that feeling.
Yeah. So the issue with movies, a lot of people put the blame on like studios and that, or the Marvel universe. The truth of the matter is that the Marvel universe is capitalizing on the current market. So movies used to be the way you would get your main entertainment. You would have TV, but it was kind of like not a big deal. It was your late shows and stuff like that, maybe a few sitcoms. But if you wanted something real, you wanted a good story, you would go to the movies. And there's been a big switch with streaming and everything. So nowadays, if you want that big epic story, you're going to subscribe to, your favorite, Netflix or whatever, stream your show, and it's fantastic. And that puts movies into a very different position than they have been in the past, where they are now looking to dazzle people on the big screen with lots of effects and, just a fun time, not the serious, like you're going in for a long story. Nowadays that's for TV. And so Marvel really fits that bill of just that, having that fun experience that dazzles everyone with the good special effects. And it's not, and of course that's expensive, and the studios once again want to dazzle the audiences, which means that their budgets for all the films are going to be expensive. This is why you don't, for example, see a lot of comedies today, because comedies are just going straight to TV, as they probably should. And so it's just a different landscape. And I'm not entirely sure that the people running the movie industry are all entire idiots who don't know what they're doing and think that movies are bad, unless they're Marvel and making tons of money. I'm pretty sure that the problem right now is that the market has changed, and I don't see how the DAO is going to fix the market.
Yeah, well, I notice I'm incredibly incompetent here. I've lost interest in all movies and all TV and all fiction over the last few years at all. I think I got too old and boring. The real world seems more interesting than any of that stuff.
I was gonna say, be very careful about that, because if the news is entertaining you, making you feel excited, scared, it might not be news. It might be propaganda. I try to keep up with the news, but I'm very aware of making sure I don't get my news from things like MSNBC. If I'm not bored to tears, that's a huge red flag.
Well, I'm not so sure it's that bad. And there's just a lot of exciting stuff happening. I think the real world is more interesting than any of this. I think it's the same thing my father used to say at this age. I've seen all those stories before. All the fiction stories are all the same.
Yeah, I mean, I don't watch a whole lot of fiction either, but I have known people that get sucked into the news cycle.
Oh, and you certainly have to be aware when you're watching propaganda, which is most of the time.
Yeah. And like I said, like if you think that the real news, like what we're doing here is very boring, which is good, which means that we're not trying to sway you one way or the other. We have like 3 audience members. That means we're doing good work.
This reminds me, I saw the Bulwark, as an anti-Trump, and they had a guy show up, and he said, and let's consider you guys have all torched your reputation. You're just totally going down the drain. And they were like offended, but of course it's true.
Right, exactly. Anyway. I mean, we have a very conversational tone about the news, which, brings it down to the level that, a lot of people want to hear, but we're not, sensationalizing things, scaring people, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, now YouTube would disagree. I mean, YouTube is going to ban my whole channel because of this controversial content on here. YouTube
threatens to ban anyone that mentions the virus.
Well, anyway, it caused me to move all my serious class videos to another platform because those would all vanish as soon as YouTube nukes me. This podcast is highly controversial and intolerable, apparently.
Well, yes. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Anyway, all right. So let's see what's next. The high-speed transmission. Liz has got that one.
This thing is cool. So I read this story about, it came out a couple of days ago across a number of different news outlets, about a new very, very high throughput data transfer system that a team of researchers at universities in Denmark, Sweden, and Japan have been developing through their research. And it's pretty crazy because they've managed to transfer a petabit per second, which is really, really a lot of data very fast, much more than we're typically typically utilizing in our day-to-day operation. So this is the way they did this is really cool. I'm not sure that I fully understand it, but what I do understand is essentially they figured out how to do this using a laser on one end and the specialized chip on another end. And the way they did it is through what they refer to as a microcomb. And essentially with these microcombs, the way that it works is that each of these the light from the laser splits the data stream into a bunch of different frequencies. And the reason they call it a comb is because the frequencies are at fixed distances from each other. And then each tooth on that comb can send its own stream of data. So essentially they've managed to boost the throughput so drastically just by the way that they're separating the data streams and managing the way that they're splitting it up within that optical fiber link. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm glad to see this one with more detail than the one I saw earlier. They made 37 sections, each with 233 channels. So it's just a new form of dense wavelength division multiplexing with many more colors of light going through the fiber. And that makes sense. You know, when I taught this stuff years ago, they taught me at Corning that the ultimate limit of bandwidth for a single strand of fiber optics was 100 terabits per second, but this is more than 10 times as much.
Yeah.
So, and it comes from being able to have even more colors go through there. So and they say that's as much bandwidth as the entire internet. So if now that this exists, I would think people will upgrade to it, and therefore the whole internet bandwidth will go up by a lot.
Well, I hope so. And, you know, one of the points that I read in another article that was pretty interesting was that this could have a pretty good impact on as far as climate footprint, because, you know, you're by using this to replace a lot of the existing tech, you know, a lot of it sucks up a lot of power, generates a lot of heat, carbon emissions, and if they're able to replace that legacy tech with this, it's really going to help a lot. So that's pretty cool.
I suppose the other thing is, of course, we can have a higher quality internet like the metaverse, like maybe even with legs and stuff, all this extra bandwidth. So. I remember this is something Bill Gates, I heard an interview with Bill Gates from like 20 years ago when they said, gee, computers are about as good as they can ever be. He said, no, it should be a 3D thing that looks like a real human talking to me with full human intelligence. There's a million times better it could be. And this is, so I mean, I think there's no question that if the whole internet was 1,000 or 1,000,000 times faster, we would immediately use that and benefit from it.
Absolutely. And I mean, especially for people like me who live in places where you know there aren't a lot of options for good fast ISPs, folks who are really, I shouldn't even put myself in that category anymore because I can actually get something that's halfway decent. A lot of folks are still trapped on DSL. Some people are still trapped on dial-up. Yeah. Which, I mean, it's kind of amazing that even still exists. But
well, our glorious savior Elon Musk has the answer in Starlink.
Sure.
Your Starlink never works though, right?
For people that can get it anyway. I mean, then that's the thing. It's not necessarily available to everybody, and even still, it's never going to compete with just the basic fiber that's available now. Yeah. Speed and throughput, you know, wise.
And apparently not. I just saw an article that they're already putting data caps on Starlink because they're running out of bandwidth.
Yeah.
So supposedly, and I don't know anything about this, but Project Kuiper from Amazon will be a much better alternative to Starlink.
Well, that would be awesome. We certainly can use more because apparently Starlink is not enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And so you've got the earthquake warnings. Caitlin?
Yeah. So last week there was an earthquake in the Bay Area. 5.1, not that big of a deal. It's a little weird when there is an earthquake in the Bay Area and you can feel it. And 5.1 you can feel, but you're in that weird state where is this like a precursor to something bigger? Because if there's a big earthquake in like the Pacific, it'll be preceded by a bit of shaking and then a lot more shaking. So you're a little on edge during it, but ultimately, nothing happened. It was 5.1. It was fine. Not a big deal. But what was really interesting is that afterwards, my coworker sent a screenshot of his phone showing that there was this earthquake warning. Now, my coworker uses Android. I use iOS. I did not get that warning. And I thought, that is really cool. What am I doing? And do I need like an app or something? No, it turns out this is actually built into Android. So androidauthority.com has an article written by Hadley Simmons talking about Android's earthquake prediction software. So what happens, and there's a nice little video here showing the accelerometers of various different Android users, and the Google servers analyze, the Google servers analyze the accelerometer data from all these phones and detect if there's an earthquake nearby. And they can actually give people 5 to 10 seconds of warning before an earthquake actually hits them, unless you're at the epicenter, because obviously the waves take time to propagate. And so I thought that is really cool. I didn't even know that Google had this capability. Like I said, it's not on the iPhone yet. But this could save a lot of lives. It seems like 5 to 10 seconds isn't that big of a deal. But when you're in the middle of an earthquake, every little bit of extra time helps. So hopefully this will become a standard safety feature on all phones moving forward.
So we should have safety drills where everyone practices. Every time your phone buzzes, you dive on the floor.
Exactly.
Just like duck and cover.
Yeah. I mean, it would be great if our phones also contained radiometers and stuff, and we could, it would detect if we're getting a lethal dose of radiation and stuff, and then warn us and dive under the covers on the events of a nuclear attack. I mean,
yeah,
there's so many things our phones could be doing that they're not.
Yeah, it's an interesting fact. Of course, the problem is you can't predict earthquakes. You can just detect that it's already underway. So you're never going to get more than a few seconds.
Right. But like I said, those few seconds can be important.
If you're me and you ignore everything your phone says anyway, you'd have to actually pay attention to your phone telling you things.
Well, it's supposedly it would be when like one of those Amber Alerts, like already all the phones give off Amber Alerts and it's really annoying and you got to shut it off.
I haven't seen one of them in a long time.
Yeah, I haven't had an Amber Alert in a while too. I guess all the criminals got stopped by all the phone Amber Alerts.
That must be it. Yeah,
Yes.
Crime must be extinct.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's it for this one. And I think we'll be back on Tuesday. I think so. My schedule's getting awfully busy, but I think I can do it the usual time on Tuesday.